One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Mike Lombardi. Mike has served in a number of leadership roles, primarily in the NFL, and he studied under a number of significant leaders, which we'll get into here shortly. Greetings, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
Now, Mike, your resume, right?
Yeah.
Started off coaching UNLV. You went on to the Niners as a scout. You went to the Browns, player personnel, senior assistant at the Raiders, worked for the Browns. You did some work for NFL Network, and you finished your career in the NFL working for the Patriots. And I say the names of the teams, but what was significant are the leaders that you worked with and for during that time. You talk about Bill Walsh, you talk about Bill Belichick, you talk about Al Davis, you talk about names like that. In that kind of situation, over those 38 years of your experience, you've had to develop your own philosophy on leadership.
Well, yeah, whenever you're in a great opportunity to learn from greatness, you kind of have to develop your own core beliefs, and you watch them. And I've been very fortunate to work for truly the greatest of all in terms of Coach Walsh and Coach Belichick as head coaches. So, yeah, so for me it really came down to there's 4 components of leadership. Command of attention, meaning you have a plan. Command of meaning you can explain the plan. Command of self, meaning you have control over yourself in terms of what you do. And command of trust, meaning the players trust you in terms of your consistency and behavior towards all your actions. And so what I learned over the course of 35 plus years is all great coaches are typically good in 3 of those 4 areas. Some perhaps, command of self tends to get away from them a little bit, but always 3 of the 4 that have had sustainable success. The ones that have had intermediate success and have bounced up and down and have no real consistency are just typically good in 2 of the 4. And eventually they'll lose their jobs. Because remember, coaching is leadership, right? So it's all about how we lead. And I think that that's where we miss the biggest message to everyone. We talk coaching and then we talk leadership when essentially a coach is a leader.
Was there a point, we're talking 38 years, right?
Yeah.
As you watched leaders and developed your own leadership philosophy, was there a point when you reached a leadership role where you came to a realization, these are the 4 things that I know is important? So,
it's been an ongoing work in progress, and I think watching Coach Walsh and understanding that he believed the 17 principles standard of performance was more important than the West Coast offense, that first didn't really hit me. In 1984, when he said to me, Michael, we're really only competing against 8 teams when it was a 28-team league, I wasn't sure what he meant. I thought it was just the other 7 teams had good quarterbacks, and I didn't realize culture was the big word. You've always hear this word chemistry, got to have chemistry. Well, really, chemistry is really culture. And then spending time with Coach Belichick and learning from him, what I was able to learn is really how to develop culture, build culture through leadership, through the leader, through the executive. And I think that's so important. And as an executive in the NFL, the culture has to come from the head coach. It can't come from the executive. I'm not in front of the players every day. The players create the culture. So I have to be part of the culture. I have to take a role within the culture. I have to adhere to the culture. And to adhere to those cultures, I just have to command trust and self of who I am to be able to allow the coach to command the other 4 areas.
Right. Now, I find myself, as I speak to leaders on this podcast, kind of developing my own philosophy. And then I find myself, when I'm in an organization or with a team or with a group, kind of analyzing it through my own philosophy, my lens. And so you spent a little bit of time outside of specifically a team with the NFL Network, and then now that what you're doing now, you're speaking, you're giving your philosophy to people. Do you find yourself, for the lack of a better word, judging?
Always, yeah. I mean, look, we're in a business that eats their young, so to speak. And so if you don't learn from other people's mistakes, you're going to not survive your mistakes. So you have to take every case study and not sit there and judge them from I I told you so. But from a learning, well, what can we learn from that? What can we glean from that? What are those other 8 teams that we really need to learn from? Because even though there's 32 teams in the league today, you're still only competing against 8. That number hasn't moved up because the 4 teams have been added to the pool. So you have to learn from other people's mistakes, and you read quotes in the paper, you can read commentary from coaches, you can read comments from owners, and you can really judge your portfolio based on what they're saying and how their performance is. What's fascinating about the NFL is it's obviously you're judged every Sunday. Patriots have won 74 games over the last 5 years. The next closest competition to them is the Pittsburgh Steelers at 57. So they've lapped the field. So their culture is so much better than everybody else. And people say, well, yeah, Lombardi, they have Tom Brady. No, they have Tom Brady, plus they have a great culture. That's why they've lapped the field.
Most of the people listening to this probably work in college athletics. Yeah. And you look, I guess, what you read in the paper and from people who you know who work in college athletics, people in leadership roles, whether they're coaches, whether they're athletics directors, presidents, and there's a lot happening right now. And when you look through the lens of your 4 pillars, do you have an opinion, I guess, on maybe you see how people are hired or just how the industry is going?
Well, look, we're in an industry that you're elected, not selected. You have to be electable because there's a media component to this. So there is always this electability, and so therefore, ADs use these search firms to help them because it helps them prove the electability of the candidate. They call it vetting. When you start using the word vet, you're really in a political race. We're vetting a candidate. We're vetting this guy. Sometimes you'll lose sight of people. Look, there's no leader who doesn't have scars of the battle because he's made decisions. So Bill Walsh used to say all the time to scouts, the search for the perfect player never ends. The search for the perfect candidate never ends either. So you have to decide what you want. You have to scout inside out. As an athletic director, you have to believe you have these core values. This is what I want my program to be. This is what I see my program going. And I'm going to find leaders that fit that program and fit that model. And then not just hire them, your job is to coach them as well. It's not like I've just hired this football coach. Okay, you go over there and win, and I'm going to judge you from afar. You've got to get your fingers into the dough and have meetings with them every week. Because what people miss about Walsh and what they miss about Belichick is they miss the fact that every day when they come to work, it was their job to maintain the culture, not necessarily just install the culture. They just didn't install it. Belichick's every day is maintaining his culture. With every move he makes, with every action he takes, he's keeping that culture going. And as an athletic director, if you're not meeting with every one of your head coaches on a weekly basis, talking about their problems and helping them, because ultimately you got this job because you're a leader, so you can enhance them. Now, you're not going to sit there and talk to them about what's the best play against cover 4 or how to beat the Mike zone dogs. That's for the coach's expertise. We're talking about culture-based help.
It's interesting you say that, and when I think about your 4 pillars, I guess from the outside looking in, have you seen someone who has command of the room, command of the message, command of self, and command of trust in terms of college athletes, in terms of the athletic directors you see, or even coaches, football, basketball?
Yeah, I'm not as, I obviously haven't come from the NFL. I'm not as privy to the athletic director world, but I mean, my job is to observe coaches, right? So my job is to look at people that have ability to create culture. Dabo Swinney at Clemson has installed an incredible culture. Here he is, a guy that basically is an interim coach who gets thrown into the fire, but he understands he needed to go become all in, and he got everybody to become all in. So I love watching that. I love examining when coaches can turn teams around and then get to the root of the problem. I think the greatest culture builder of all time is Coach Norman Dale from the movie Hoosiers. Because when you follow what Coach Dale did, if you just watched Hoosiers as a movie, as a culture movie, what he did was Jimmy Chitwood didn't buy into the program. He wasn't going to, but he didn't go and kiss Jimmy Chitwood's ass. He went over and basically practiced what we call the law of 3s. There's 3 groups of people in every organization. The first group will do anything you want them to do. The second group is undecided. The third group you can't make happy no matter what you do, right? So as a leader, instinctively, you try to go to group 3. You try to win over group 3, figuring if I get the best player to come on my team, then I'm going to turn this team around. Wrong. Ignore group 3. It's what Coach Dale did. He ignored Jimmy Chitwood. Jimmy Chitwood eventually moved into group 1 because he got there. So to me, other than, I watch college basketball, this one and done. I think Coach Calipari is one of the greatest culture builders of all time because every year he has to rebuild the culture. He has to reestablish it. And people say, yeah, Lombardi, but hell, he's getting 5-star kids all the time. Yeah, really? He's getting 5-star kids? You try doing it with kids that are more worried about their name on the back than a name on the front. And that takes a great leader to build a culture to convert the name on the back into the name on the front.
Now you talk about the people you worked for, right? Yeah. Belichick, Al Davis, Bill Walsh. The knowledge they have, which helped you come to these 4 pillars, right? That information in terms of having it all in one collective, you were privy to a lot. From what I understand, you've recently put out a book, yes, right, where you've gathered this information in terms of leadership, in terms of command of the room, command of the message, command of self, command of trust, and the aspects some of these people you worked with and for, how they embodied those things. Tell us a little bit about how you captured that information and what it's involved in.
Well, I think it was, look, when you're on this, there's 2 kind of jobs you have in life, right? Jobs you can make a difference in and jobs you can grow from. And if you're in a job you can only grow from, you got to grow. And so fortunately for me, as a young age, I was only able to grow working for Bill Walsh. I just could grow. I didn't know anything. I had to grow. And so you learn from them how they had set things up, and you can kind of adopt it into your own style. I mean, Al Davis was the great brand of all time because Al Davis insisted that you always call the Raiders the Oakland Raiders, like the White House. And then he was constantly reminding coaches that anytime you stood in front of the media, you were really not addressing the media. You were addressing 3 areas: your players, your owner, and your fan base. And you better have a message every single day for those 3 areas. And regardless of what the questions are, you've got to address those 3 areas every single day. So you learn that. That's command of the message, right? You're learning that. And then command of command of self. How are you adapting to the changes in the game? Are you staying up? Do you spend an hour a day reading? I've been fortunate enough to become close friends with Coach George Raveling, one of the greatest men I've ever been around. At 81 years old, he's still curious about everything, and he's still learning. And so as a head coach, it's challenging, or as an athletic director, it's challenging to spend time learning. But it's the only chance you have to keep and create the culture and keep moving with it.
Right. That you want to do to be successful. Now, you've done some speaking. I wonder, in terms of if you addressed businesses, the corporate world, have you had the opportunity to translate this into information that they can receive and apply? Of course, people always want to hear about sports, right? It's easy because they can relate to the names, they can relate to the experiences. Talk to me about how, whether it be CEOs or just people who work in the corporate world outside of sports, interpret this information when you deliver.
Well, I think it's really, look, sports is a business. Mike Trout gets a record contract at $450, and people are walking around saying, how could they pay him all that money? Well, we don't realize Mike Trout's an entertainer. Nobody complains how much money Bruce Springsteen makes when he goes on tour because we see Bruce Springsteen as an entertainer. We don't see Mike Trout as an entertainer, which is a complete wrong. Mike Trout's an entertainer. And so everything we do in sports is related to business. And so it relates to Wall Street. It relates to any little business, And so because you can take the practicalities of the book and utilize them in any one of your businesses, it's a leadership culture book disguised as a football book. That's ultimately what it is. And when you put the book down, you basically can apply these lessons to whatever business you have. Because sports is a business. When David Tepper just spent $2.3 billion to buy the Carolina Panthers, he just didn't buy the Panthers as a sport. It's his business. And same with Steve Ballmer buying the Los Angeles Clippers for $2 billion. It's his business. How do I make my business grow? How do I make my business better? How do I install a culture? And I think that's ultimately what you'll learn from this book.
Right, exactly. And when you're talking to corporations, you're talking to athletic directors, whoever you're talking to, it's all the same, and all these things apply.
Yeah, most successful organizations look alike. They all do. They all have culture. They all have people going in the right direction. They don't have Bill Walsh used to say all the time, the reason we're only competing against 8 is because the other 20 have a civil war going on inside their building. And, you don't have to worry about teams. Most organizations that fail are having civil wars within their building.
Right. Well, Mike, this has been an excellent conversation. I think people listening have learned a lot, me included, learned a lot from the conversation. I really appreciate you joining us on One Question.
Thank you.
That was Mike Lombardi. He is a former NFL executive who worked with a number of leaders, and he's a great leader himself. He talked about his book, Gridiron Genius. And of course, this is Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.